Colonel Marcus Halford stood in the tactical operations room at Fort Benning, Georgia, watching the numbers on the screen refuse to make sense. The air conditioning hummed overhead, keeping the room at a crisp 68 degrees, but sweat gathered at the base of his neck anyway. 6 shipping containers, military-grade weapons worth $3.2 million, vanished in 72 hours. Not stolen according to the logs, not misplaced according to the manifests, simply gone, as if they had evaporated into the humid Georgia air. The security footage showed nothing. He had watched it 3 times now, frame by frame, looking for the glitch, the gap, the moment when someone should have appeared, but didn't. Every camera angle showed routine warehouse operations. Every timestamp aligned perfectly. Every logged entry matched the duty roster. Except the weapons were no longer there. M4 carbines, enough ammunition to supply a battalion for 3 months. Night vision equipment that cost more per unit than most Americans earned in a year. All accounted for on paper. All missing in reality. The kind of missing that ended careers and started investigations. He turned to the man beside him. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Crane, his second in command, a career officer with 20 years of covering tracks and asking no questions. Crane's face held the expression of someone who had seen this before but hoped never to see it again. "Explain this to me," Halford said. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through 3 decades of military service and a collection of decisions he preferred not to remember. 6 containers, 48 hours, no breach, no alarm, no witnesses. Crane shifted his weight. The movement was subtle, but Halford caught it. A tell. The man was nervous. "Sir, there's talk among the enlisted. Old talk from the veterans who were in Iraq. I don't care about talk, I care about weapons. They're calling it ghost work." The word hung in the air between them like smoke from an old fire. Ghost. Halford had heard the stories. Every military installation had its legends, its ghost stories told by soldiers who needed something bigger than themselves to believe in. This particular legend had roots that went back 21 years, to a dusty city called Nasiriyah and a bombing that left more questions than bodies. The Ghost of Nasiriyah, a combat medic who disappeared after the attack, presumed dead. But every few years, when corruption got too deep, when officers started trading lives for career advancement, the ghost appeared. Or so the story went. Weapons would go missing, evidence would surface, powerful men would fall. Halford had always dismissed it as barracks mythology. Soldiers needed their heroes and their monsters. The ghost served both purposes. "Ghosts don't exist," he said. "Find me someone with a pulse and a motive." Crane nodded, but his eyes said something else. They said he wasn't so sure anymore. 15 miles away, in the dim fluorescent light of Warehouse C-14, Iris Corwin moved through her morning inventory with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this exact routine for 7 years. Every step measured, every movement deliberate. Clipboard in hand, a titanium walking cane in the other, she checked serial numbers against manifests while the morning sun tried and failed to penetrate the warehouse's high windows. Her limp was pronounced but efficient, the result of spending 16 hours trapped under concrete and rebar in a city that no longer existed in any form she would recognize. The cane wasn't a crutch, it was a tool, and like all her tools, it served multiple purposes that had nothing to do with walking. She was 60 years old. Grey hair pulled back tight enough to give her a permanent headache. But loose hair was a liability in close-quarters combat, and old habits died harder than the people who taught them. Face weathered by Middle Eastern sun, and the kind of choices that left marks deeper than any shrapnel. The younger soldiers who worked the warehouse called her ma'am and kept their distance. She preferred it that way. Distance meant fewer questions. Fewer questions meant fewer lies. And she had told enough lies in 7 years to fill the very containers she was pretending to inventory. At 0900 hours, she paused at a stack of ammunition crates. M855 rounds, standard issue. She ran her finger along the edge of one crate, feeling for the slight imperfection she had created 3 days prior with a box cutter. The mark was invisible to cameras but obvious to touch. A single line, barely deeper than a scratch. Marked. She moved on. The cameras tracked her movement but saw nothing unusual. Just an older woman doing her job. They didn't see her palm the UV marker. Didn't see the symbol she drew on the underside of another crate. Didn't see the slight adjustment she made to the manifest, changing a 7 to a 9 in handwriting that matched the duty officers perfectly. No dialogue, no explanation, just work. The kind of quiet, invisible work that changed everything while appearing to change nothing. She finished her rounds at 1100 hours, logged out, walked to her truck, a 15-year-old Ford that blended into every parking lot in Georgia, drove home to an apartment that held no photographs, no personal items, nothing that would tell a story about who lived there. But that night, she didn't stay home. Dylan Reese was 25 years old and still believed the Army worked the way they said it did in the recruiting videos. Honor, duty, integrity, words that meant something, words worth dying for. He was a private first class assigned to supply logistics, which meant he counted things and made sure the numbers matched. Usually they did. The Army ran on numbers that added up, on inventories that balanced, on a system that worked because everyone followed the rules. For the past 6 weeks, the numbers hadn't matched. At first, he thought it was his mistake. Recounted 3 times, checked his math, asked his supervisor, who told him to mind his own business and sign the manifest. But Dylan had grown up with a father who died serving this uniform, and signing false documents wasn't something he could do, not even to keep his head down, not even to survive. At 0200 hours, wearing civilian clothes that made him feel naked without his uniform, he slipped into warehouse C14 using the access code he had memorized from watching the duty officer's fingers on the keypad. 6 digits, muscle memory from standing too close during shift change. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out his phone, the glow from the screen seeming impossibly bright in the darkness. The newer soldiers carried everything on their phones now. Evidence, confessions, proof, digital breadcrumbs that could save lives or end them, depending on who found them first. He found the ammunition manifest clipped to the duty station and started photographing. Each page took 3 shots to capture the fine print, the serial numbers, the signatures of officers who had certified that everything was present and accounted for. Each discrepancy jumped out at him like a flare in the darkness. Crate after crate logged as present, inspected, certified, sealed, except Dylan had physically checked yesterday, had actually opened the containers during a routine transfer. Half of them were empty, filled with sand to match the weight, the kind of detail that spoke to professional planning and systematic execution. Someone had replaced 40,000 rounds of ammunition with Georgia dirt, and no one had noticed because no one had looked. No one except a 23-year-old private who still thought the rules mattered. The lights cut out. Total darkness. Not a power failure. Someone had thrown the breakers. Dylan's heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped into a crouch behind a pallet of equipment, phone clutched in his sweating palm. Footsteps, measured, professional, at least 3 people, moving with tactical precision through the warehouse. Dylan held his breath. His phone's screen was dark, but even the faint glow might give him away. A voice cut through the darkness. Lieutenant Colonel Crane. Dylan recognized the nasal tone from countless morning formations. Find the kid. Colonel wants him quiet. Permanently. Another voice, younger, enlisted. What if he already sent the photos? Then we make sure no one believes them. Dead whistleblowers are just disgruntled soldiers. You know the story. Mental health issues. Couldn't handle the pressure. Tragedy. Dylan's mouth went dry. They were going to kill him. Frame it as suicide. The Army had done it before. Everyone knew, but no one said it out loud. He started to move, to find another route to the exit. His boot scraped concrete. The sound was tiny, but in the silence it might as well have been a gunshot. Southeast corner, move. Dylan ran. No thought, no plan, just animal instinct screaming to get out. He crashed into something, a storage rack that shouldn't have been there. Boxes tumbled. The noise was catastrophic. Crane's flashlight beam swept toward him. Dylan was trapped, pinned between 2 rows of shelving with nowhere to go and 3 armed men closing in. Then something else clattered on the far side of the warehouse. A metallic crash, deliberate and loud. Crane's light swung away. Check that. Could be a diversion. The footsteps moved away from Dylan's position. He used the moment, scrambling through the gap between shelves, heading for where he thought the exit was. His phone was still in his hand. The evidence was still there. If he could just get out. He burst through the personnel door into the humid Georgia night and kept running. Behind him, he heard Crane shouting, but no one followed. Dylan didn't stop to wonder why. He just ran until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. He had nowhere to go. No one he trusted. Except one person. A name his father had made him memorize before deploying to Iraq all those years ago. A name spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for battlefield legends. Grant Mitchell. Colonel Halford received the report at 0600. The warehouse incident. Private Reese missing. Lieutenant Colonel Crane's team returning empty-handed with a story about equipment failure and false alarms. Halford didn't believe in coincidences, and he didn't believe in equipment failures at military installations with redundant systems. Someone was playing games. Someone was 3 steps ahead. He called an emergency meeting. 8 officers, all with security clearances, all with knowledge of Project Phoenix. The room was swept for bugs twice. The doors were locked. No phones, no recordings, no witnesses. Crane arrived last, and he brought something with him. A Ziploc evidence bag containing a piece of fabric. Old, faded green, stained with what looked like dried blood. Found this in the warehouse, sir, near where the distraction noise came from. Halford took the bag. The fabric was a medical armband. Standard military issue, but old. The kind they hadn't used in 20 years. He could make out part of the unit designation through the plastic. 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, Nasiriyah. The date stitched into the corner read 2003. That unit was disbanded, one of the officers said, after the bombing. 11 casualties, another added. 8 buried alive in the rubble. Only 3 made it out. Halford stared at the armband. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. Nasiriyah. He had been there. A captain then, ambitious, hungry for advancement. When the building came down and the evacuation helicopters arrived, he had made a choice. There had been room for 12 on the last medevac. 15 people needed rescue. Someone had to decide who lived and who died. He had chosen himself and 11 others, left the rest to whatever came next. It was war. People made hard choices. He had survived. He had thrived. That was the only metric that mattered. Until now. Sir, Crane said quietly, the legend, about the ghost. Some of the vets say it's real. They say there was a medic in that unit, disappeared after the rescue operations. Never confirmed dead, never confirmed alive, just gone. And every time some officer crosses a line, the ghost comes back. Fairy tales, Halford said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe. But General Madsen in 2015, the weapon sales to the cartels. 3 weeks before his arrest, weapons started going missing from his base. No explanation. Then evidence appeared. Then he went to prison. Coincidence. Colonel Briggs in 2018. Same pattern. Weapons gone, evidence surfaced, career destroyed. Halford set down the evidence bag. His mind was running calculations. If someone was targeting him specifically, someone who knew about Nasiriyah, then this wasn't about missing weapons. This was personal. This was about the past coming to collect its debts. Find Dylan Reese, he ordered. I don't care what it takes. Find him and bring him in. If he resists, put him down. Make it look like he fired first. The officers nodded and filed out. Only Crane remained. Sir, what if it really is her? The medic from Nasiriyah. What if the ghost is real? Halford met his eyes. Then we're already dead. We just don't know it yet. Grant Mitchell was 62 years old and looked like he had earned every year through combat and conscience in equal measure. Retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps. 3 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and a collection of medals he kept in a drawer, wrapped in a t-shirt and never looked at, because looking at them meant remembering the men who didn't come home to receive theirs. He ran a Veterans Outreach Center in Columbus, a converted storefront with peeling paint and furniture donated by churches, helping former soldiers transition to civilian life. Most days it felt like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon, watching young men and women drown in a world that thanked them for their service and then forgot they existed. But some days, maybe 1 day a month if he was lucky, he saved a life, pulled someone back from the edge, found them a job, a purpose, a reason to keep breathing. That made it worth it. That made the nightmares and the guilt and the weight of 21 years of survivor's remorse almost bearable. Dylan Reese showed up at his door at 0400 hours, wild-eyed and shaking, looking so much like his father that Mitchell felt something crack in his chest. Same eyes, the color of Georgia clay, same stubborn jaw that broadcast every emotion he was trying to hide. Same foolish bravery that got good men killed before they understood the difference between courage and suicide. Inside, he said, already scanning the street for followers, for shadows that moved wrong, for the shape of violence approaching. Now, Dylan stumbled through the doorway like a man who had been running on adrenaline alone and was only now realizing how close he had come to dying. Mitchell locked the door behind him, threw the deadbolt, checked the street through the window one more time. Clear. For now. But clear never lasted long once you were marked, and this kid was marked from the moment he started asking questions. "They tried to kill me," Dylan said, the words tumbling out fast and desperate. "Crane and his people. They're stealing weapons, millions of dollars worth. I have proof, I have photos. But they know I have them and they're going to kill me and make it look like suicide and no one will believe me because I'm just a private and they're colonels and—" "Sit down," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the kind of command that came from 25 years of giving orders that kept people alive. "Breathe. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." The kid talked for 20 minutes, the whole story spilling out in fragments and run-on sentences, and Mitchell listened without interrupting, because he had learned a long time ago that sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was just witness their truth. The story was worse than he expected. Weapons trafficking was one thing, a crime as old as armies themselves, officers skimming supplies and selling them to the highest bidder. But the scale Dylan described, the systematic replacement of live ammunition with sand, the manifests doctored at multiple levels, the involvement of senior officers across multiple departments. This wasn't a rogue sergeant skimming supplies to pay off gambling debts. This was organized. This was command-level corruption. This was the kind of operation that required protection from the top, political cover, and connections that went far beyond Fort Benning. "I uploaded the photos to cloud storage," Dylan finished, "but I need help decrypting the logistics codes. The manifests are coded. Without the key, I just have pictures of numbers." Mitchell opened his safe. Inside was a notebook. 21 years of documentation. Every suspicious transfer, every convenient death, every officer who got promoted after a scandal went quiet. And at the center of it all, one name, Marcus Halford. "Your father saved my life in Nasiriyah," Mitchell said. "Did he ever tell you that story?" "He died when I was 4. I don't remember him. He was a good Marine, better man. When our position got hit, when the building came down, he stayed. Kept pressure on an arterial bleed for another Marine while the world exploded around us. Medic told him he saved that Marine's life just by not panicking." "What medic?" "Only one who made it out and then disappeared. Woman named Iris Corwin, combat medic attached to our unit. When the rescue choppers came, she made sure everyone else got on before her. There wasn't room. She stayed behind." Dylan leaned forward. "What happened to her?" "Official report says MIA, presumed dead, but there were rumors. Soldiers who swore they saw her months later, years later. Always around bases where something dirty was happening. Always just before someone powerful took a fall. They started calling her the Ghost." "You think she's real?" Mitchell pulled out a photograph from the notebook. A group shot taken 2 days before the bombing. 24 Marines, desert camouflage, squinting in the Iraqi sun. He pointed to a woman in the back row. Lean, hard-eyed, maybe 35 years old. She wasn't smiling. "That's Iris Corwin. And I think she's been at Fort Benning for the last 7 years, watching Halford, waiting for him to step far enough out of line." Dylan stared at the photo. "How do you know?" "Because your father told me something before he died. Infection took him 3 days after we got stateside. But he was lucid at the end. He made me promise to look after you if anything happened. And he told me about Halford." Mitchell's voice went cold, hard as iron. "Marcus Halford was the captain in our unit. When the medevac came, there was room for 12. 15 of us needed rescue. Halford took one of those spots. He wasn't injured, wasn't critical, he just wanted out. Your father was one of the 4 left behind. He lived because Corwin refused to leave. She stayed in that rubble for 16 hours, keeping 4 men alive until the second rescue team arrived. Halford got a Bronze Star for heroism that day. Corwin got listed as MIA. Dylan's hands clenched into fists. "So he's been dirty from the start." "Dirty doesn't cover it. I've tracked him for 21 years. Every post he's commanded, equipment goes missing. But he's careful, covers his tracks until now. A sound outside, subtle, the scrape of a boot on concrete. Mitchell was moving before his conscious mind registered the threat. He grabbed Dylan, pulled him away from the window just as the front door crashed inward. 4 men. Military tactical gear, no insignia. They moved like professionals, weapons up, covering angles. Mitchell had his sidearm out, but 4 against 1 was suicide math. Then the lights died. Total darkness. Mitchell heard the men moving, heard their equipment rustle, heard one of them whisper into a radio. He pulled Dylan deeper into the house, toward the back exit, using memory and muscle to navigate. A thud, a grunt. The sound of someone hitting the floor hard. Then another. Mitchell froze, trying to understand what was happening. The tactical team was being taken down, in the dark, without gunfire. When the lights came back on, all 4 men were on the ground. Unconscious, small darts in their necks. Tranquilizer rounds fired with surgical precision. Mitchell and Dylan stood in the hallway, untouched. On the wall, written in white chalk in clean block letters, was a message. "Stand down, I have this." No signature, no explanation. Mitchell felt something he hadn't felt in 21 years. Hope. "She's real," Dylan whispered. "The ghost is real." Mitchell walked to the window, watched the empty street. Somewhere out there, Iris Corwin was moving, working, settling accounts that had been outstanding for 2 decades. "Yeah," he said, "she's real, and Halford just became a dead man walking." Colonel Marcus Halford's phone rang at 0700. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something in his gut, that same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments, told him this call mattered. "Halford." A woman's voice, older, calm. "4 of your men are in Grant Mitchell's living room. Alive. I could have killed them. I chose not to. Think about that." The line went dead. Halford's hands were shaking. He pulled up the security footage from Mitchell's house. The feed was corrupted, nothing but static, but the GPS trackers on his tactical team showed all 4 units stationary at Mitchell's address, not responding to comms. Someone had taken down 4 special operations soldiers without firing a shot, without leaving a trace, without making a sound. He pulled up the Fort Benning personnel database with hands that wanted to shake but couldn't afford to show weakness, not even to himself, not even in his private office with no one watching. Typed in a name he had not thought about in 21 years. A name he had worked very hard to forget because forgetting was easier than remembering what he had done. Corwin, Iris, status, MIA, presumed deceased, March 2003. The screen showed a photo from her service record. Younger, harder, eyes that had already seen too much, but hadn't yet learned what it meant to be betrayed by the people you served beside. He remembered her vaguely, the way you remember background characters in someone else's story. The medic who stayed, the one who made him look bad by comparison because she had chosen honor over survival and somehow lived anyway. Then he searched current employees, not really expecting to find anything, just checking boxes, covering bases, doing the work that his paranoia demanded. Corwin, Iris. Warehouse Logistics, GS7, civilian contractor. Hired April 2017. Current posting, Warehouse C14. His blood turned to ice water. His hands stopped moving entirely. The office suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in, the air thick and hard to breathe. 7 years. She had been there for 7 years. Working 15 feet from his stolen weapons, watching him, documenting everything. Waiting with the patience of someone who had already died once and understood that revenge was a dish best served cold enough to freeze the target solid. He pulled up her personnel file with fingers that finally admitted they were shaking. The photo showed a woman in her 60s, grey hair pulled back severe, face weathered by time and sun, completely unremarkable in the way that dangerous people often were. Just another older woman working a government job, counting inventory, filing paperwork, invisible to everyone who mattered. But when he enlarged the photo, when he forced himself to really look at her eyes instead of just glancing and dismissing, he saw it. The same hard certainty from that service record photo. The same expression she must have worn when she stayed in the rubble while he flew away to safety and medals he didn't earn. The same woman who had every reason to hate him and 21 years to plan what she would do about it. His stomach lurted. Halford started pulling security footage with the desperate energy of a man who already knew what he would find, but needed to see it anyway, needed to understand the scope of his failure. 21 days of archived video. He watched at triple speed, scanning for anything unusual, any moment where the invisible became visible. There. 3 weeks ago, 0300 hours, during the shift change that created a 7-minute gap in active coverage. Corwin entering warehouse C14 through the loading dock, moving like someone who owned the space, who knew every camera angle and every blind spot better than the security officers who supposedly monitored them. Using an access code that should have required colonel-level clearance, punching it in without hesitation, without checking notes, because she had memorized it months or years ago. She moved through the warehouse like water, fluid and purposeful, opening containers with keys she shouldn't have possessed, inspecting weapons she had no authorization to touch, checking serial numbers against some internal list only she could see, then closing them, leaving everything exactly as she found it, except for one detail, one tiny adjustment that Halford only caught because he was looking for it. The camera angle shifted 3 degrees to the left, creating a blind spot that hadn't existed before. A blind spot exactly where she needed it for whatever came next. He went back further, compelled now, unable to stop, even though each new discovery was another nail in his coffin. 6 months, a year, 2 years. Every week, sometimes multiple times per week, Corwin would enter the warehouse after hours. Always during shift changes. Always when the cameras glitched for exactly 0.3 seconds. A technical impossibility unless someone had access to the security system itself and knew how to manipulate the timestamp code. Long enough for her to appear in a different position than the previous frame. Long enough to create plausible deniability. Long enough to make anyone reviewing the footage question whether they had actually seen what they thought they saw. 7 years of this. 7 years of her walking through his operation like a ghost, learning every detail, mapping every transaction, building a case so thorough and so devastating that by the time she moved, by the time she revealed herself, there would be no defense and no escape. And he had never noticed. Never even suspected. Had walked past her in the warehouse 100 times, maybe more, and never recognized the woman who had every reason to want him destroyed. Halford picked up the phone, called his lawyer, called his political contacts, started building his defense. But even as he made the calls, he knew Iris Corwin hadn't survived Nasiriyah and 21 years of hunting corrupt officers by being stupid. She wouldn't move unless she had everything. Every document, every witness, every piece of evidence locked down so tight there was no escape. His office door opened. He looked up. Senator Catherine Vale stood there, impeccably dressed, power radiating from her like heat from asphalt. She was his patron, his protector, the political force that made Project Phoenix possible. "We have a problem," she said. "I know, Corwin. Not just Corwin. CID received an anonymous package 2 hours ago, 400 pages of documentation. Shipping manifests, financial transfers, encrypted communications, everything." Halford felt his world tilting. How? I don't know. But they're moving fast. Arrest warrants are being prepared. You have maybe 12 hours before this becomes public. Can you stop it? Vale's expression was unreadable. Maybe, but it will cost you. Everything you have. Every favor, every asset. Do it. She turned to leave, then paused. Marcus, who is Iris Corwin, really? A ghost from Nasiriyah. Someone I should have made sure stayed dead. Well, she's not dead, and she's coming for you. At 1400 hours, Colonel Marcus Halford was arrested by the Criminal Investigation Division in his office at Fort Benning. The charges were extensive: theft of government property, conspiracy, trafficking in stolen weapons. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, video footage. A perfect case built over 7 years by someone who understood how the system worked, because she had once been part of it. As the CID agents led him out in handcuffs, Halford looked down the hallway. At the far end, leaning against the wall with a titanium cane, was Iris Corwin. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched him with eyes that had seen him at his worst and remembered every detail. He tried to speak, tried to justify, to explain, to somehow make her understand that Nasiriyah had been war, and war made monsters of everyone. But she just shook her head once. A small movement, dismissive. Then she turned and walked away. the cane clicking on the tile floor, and Marcus Halford understood what it meant to be haunted by something more powerful than memory. That night, released on bail through Vale's intervention, Halford sat in his house and tried to process what had happened. His career was over. His freedom was measured in days or weeks at most. 21 years of careful construction destroyed by a woman who should have been dead. His phone rang. Unknown number again. He answered. A woman's voice, not Iris, someone else, younger, professional. Colonel Halford, my name is not important. What matters is that I represent certain interests who are very unhappy with recent developments. Who is this? I manage the acquisition side of Project Phoenix, the buyers, the clients who pay very well for the weapons you've been providing. And I'm calling to tell you that Ms. Corwin has made a significant error. What error? She let Dylan Reese live. That young man knows far too much. And unlike you, he's not protected by lawyers and political connections. He's vulnerable, exposed. And if he were to die in a tragic way, if the evidence were to suggest that Iris Corwin had something to do with it, well, dead heroes make poor witnesses. And Corwin would go from righteous crusader to suspected murderer very quickly. Halford's pulse quickened. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you have one chance to salvage this. Kill Dylan Reese, make it public, make it brutal, and frame Iris Corwin for it. We'll handle the legal aspects, we'll handle the narrative. All you have to do is pull the trigger. Where is Reese? With the man protecting him. Grant Mitchell, same address your team failed to breach last night. But this time, you won't fail. Because this time, I'm giving you resources your tactical team didn't have. What resources? People who make problems disappear. People who don't leave witnesses. Get it done, Colonel. Or the next person we disappear will be you. The line went dead. Halford sat in the darkness of his study, staring at the phone. He had spent his entire career making hard choices, sacrificing the few for the many, choosing survival over honor. This was just another choice. He picked up his phone and started making calls. By morning, Dylan Reese would be dead, and Iris Corwin would finally understand what it meant to lose. Outside, in a truck parked 3 blocks away, Iris Corwin listened to the recording of Halford's phone conversation through the tap she had placed on his line 6 months ago. She closed her laptop and started the engine. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had planned. The Ghost of Nasiriyah was about to become very real, and this time there would be no survivors on the wrong side of justice. The attack came at 0200 hours, exactly when Marcus Halford said it would, because men like Halford were predictable in their desperation. 12 soldiers, not the original 4, all armed with automatic weapons and orders that left no room for interpretation, no space for conscience, no possibility of prisoners. Kill Dylan Reese, kill Grant Mitchell, make it look like a firefight gone wrong, plant weapons if necessary, fabricate evidence if convenient. The story would write itself in the language of official reports and press releases. Troubled veteran suffering from PTSD and radicalized private first class, killed in a tragic standoff with federal agents attempting to serve a lawful warrant. The media would run it for 3 days, maybe 4 if it was a slow news cycle, and then move on to the next tragedy, the next scandal, the next thing that demanded outrage without requiring action. Mitchell heard them coming before they reached the house. Decades of sleeping light in places where sleeping deep meant dying. Of waking at the sound of footsteps that didn't belong to anyone who should be walking past your door at 2 in the morning. Of knowing in your bones that survival meant staying 1 step ahead of the people who wanted you dead and 2 steps ahead of the people who didn't know they wanted you dead yet. He was out of bed and moving before his conscious mind fully registered the threat, muscle memory taking over from thought, grabbing Dylan from the couch where the kid had finally crashed after 18 hours of pure adrenaline and fear, pulling him toward the back bedroom that had a window large enough to escape through and walls reinforced enough to buy them 30 seconds of cover while they climbed out. But 30 seconds wouldn't be enough. Not against 12 trained soldiers with night vision that turned darkness into green daylight and automatic weapons that could shred the walls of his house like tissue paper, and the kind of professional certainty that came from following orders without questioning them, without thinking about whether the orders were lawful or whether the targets were guilty or whether this was the kind of thing they would tell their children about when the nightmares came. The front door exploded inward. Breaching charge placed with precision, Detonated with perfect timing. Professional. Fast. The kind of entry that spoke to extensive training and recent practice. Mitchell had his sidearm out, a Glock 19 that had followed him through 2 wars and a dozen years of civilian paranoia. But the math was suicide, and he knew it. 12 against 2. One of them a 62-year-old man with bad knees and worse memories, the other a kid who had never fired a weapon outside of a range, never felt the recoil when you knew the target was human, never made the choice between killing and dying, and discovered which one you valued more. They were dead. They just didn't know it yet. Didn't know the exact second when the bullets would find them, didn't know whether it would hurt or happen too fast to register. Then the lights died and the screaming started. Not screaming like fear, screaming like pain. Sharp, sudden, cut off mid-breath, the sound of men going down hard and fast. Mitchell froze, trying to understand what was happening in the darkness, trying to map the sounds to some tactical scenario that made sense. But nothing made sense. The assault team was being taken down, in the dark, without return fire. When the lights came back on 90 seconds later, all 12 soldiers were on the ground. Not dead, breathing, but unconscious with small tranquilizer darts in their necks, fired with the kind of precision that spoke to surgical skill and intimate knowledge of human anatomy. Each dart placed exactly where it would drop a target instantly without causing permanent damage. Combat medicine applied in reverse. Knowing how to save a life meant knowing how to end it or pause it at will. Mitchell stood in his hallway, gun still raised, trying to process what he was seeing. Dylan stood beside him, face pale, hands shaking. Neither of them had fired a shot. Neither of them had moved. The attack had come and gone like a summer storm, violent and complete, leaving wreckage but no explanation. On the wall, written in the same white chalk as before, a new message. Nasiriyah, 2003. He ran, they died. I remember every face. No signature, no explanation, but Mitchell understood. Iris Corwin hadn't just saved them. She had sent Halford a message, a reminder that she was 3 steps ahead and had been for 7 years. A reminder that every move he made was anticipated, countered, turned into evidence against him. Dylan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. 2 words. You're safe. Mitchell looked at the unconscious soldiers, at the message on the wall, at the kid who was still alive because a ghost from 21 years ago had kept a promise she had no obligation to keep. And he felt something he hadn't felt since Nasiriyah. Not hope exactly. Something harder. Something closer to certainty that the good guys might actually win this time. Outside, 3 blocks away, Iris Corwin sat in her truck and watched the live feed from the micro cameras she had planted in Mitchell's house 6 months ago. Watched the tactical team go down. Watched Mitchell and Dylan realize they were safe. Watched the message she had left do its work in their minds. She closed the laptop, started the engine. The night was far from over. Halford would regroup, would escalate, would make mistakes, and she would be there to document every single one. The phone call came at 0700 hours, while Marcus Halford was staring at the report of his failed assault and trying to understand how 12 trained operators had been neutralized without firing a shot. The voice was female, professional, with an edge that suggested she was used to being obeyed. Colonel Halford, we need to discuss your failure. Who is this? I'm the person who has kept you out of prison for the past 7 years. I'm the person who makes sure your little weapons operation continues to function. And I'm the person who is very disappointed in your inability to handle one 60-year-old woman. Halford's grip tightened on the phone. She's not just a woman. She's a trained combat medic who has been planning this for 2 decades. I'm aware of what she is. I'm also aware that you left her to die in Nasiriyah, which makes this situation rather poetic, don't you think? The woman you abandoned is now destroying everything you built. What do you want? I want you to understand something, Colonel. Iris Corwin has made a mistake. She let Dylan Reese live. That boy has evidence that could damage more than just your career. He has evidence that leads to me, to my organization, to operations that span 3 continents and involve people who make you look like a small-town criminal. Halford's pulse quickened. He had always suspected his weapons operation was part of something larger, but he had never asked questions, never wanted to know. Plausible deniability was the only shield that mattered. What do you want me to do? Nothing. You're compromised. Watched. Iris knows your every move, but I have resources you don't. And I have information she doesn't. Do you know who I am, Colonel? No. Good. Keep it that way. But know this. I was in Nasiriyah too, March 2003. I was one of the people buried in that rubble. And Iris Corwin made a choice that day. She chose to save 8 people. She didn't know there was a 9th person trapped in a different room. She didn't know I existed. And by the time anyone found me, I had lost a leg, my ability to have children, and 14 months of my life to a coma. Halford felt cold spreading through his chest. You're the one funding Phoenix Protocol. I'm the one who created it. Weapons testing on live targets, data collection from real combat, all to ensure that American soldiers never die from equipment failure again. Because I died from equipment failure, Colonel. I died because the medevac was full. Because Iris Corwin chose to save others and didn't even know I needed saving. I'm the ghost she doesn't remember, and I'm going to use that against her. How? Dylan Reese will die, publicly, brutally, and the evidence will point to Iris Corwin. We'll paint her as a rogue operative who went too far, a vigilante who murdered an innocent soldier, and when she tries to defend herself, when she tries to present evidence, we'll erase it. All of it. Because I control the servers that evidence is stored on. I control the data. I control the narrative. She'll know it's a setup. Of course she will, but knowing and proving are different things, and I have resources she can't imagine. So here's what you're going to do, Colonel. Nothing. Sit tight. Let the legal process play out. And when the time comes, when I've destroyed her credibility and her evidence, you'll be released. Cleared. Free to continue your work under new management. The line went dead. Halford sat in his office, staring at the phone, trying to process what he had just heard. Someone had been watching Iris, studying her, building a trap that used her own history against her. Someone who had every reason to hate her and 21 years to plan revenge. He should have felt relieved, should have felt saved. But all he felt was a creeping certainty that he was a pawn in a game between 2 women who had both died in Nasiriyah and both come back harder. The news broke at noon. Every major network, every cable channel, every news website. Private First Class Dylan Reese wanted for theft of military weapons and the murder of a federal agent during a standoff at a veterans' home in Columbus, Georgia. The story had everything. Young soldier radicalized by conspiracy theories. Violent confrontation. A manhunt underway, authorities urging anyone with information to come forward. The federal agent who had allegedly been killed didn't exist. The weapon Dylan had supposedly used was a planted throwdown that had never been in his possession. The conspiracy theories were fabricated from whole cloth, but the public didn't know that. The public saw the mugshot, the military uniform, the serious face of a young man who could be a hero or a terrorist, depending on which narrative you believed. Mitchell watched the news with growing horror. Dylan sat beside him, face drained of color, watching his life get destroyed in real time. They're framing me, Dylan whispered. Everything I did, everything I found, it doesn't matter now. I'm the bad guy. We'll prove it's false. How? You think anyone will believe me over a colonel and a senator? You think the truth matters when they control the story? Mitchell didn't answer because he didn't have an answer. The kid was right. In the court of public opinion, Dylan had already been convicted, and in a military tribunal, without evidence that hadn't been erased or corrupted, he would be convicted again. The door opened. Neither Mitchell nor Dylan had heard it. Neither had seen anyone approach. But Iris Corwin stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane, face expressionless. We need to move, she said. This house is burned. They'll be back with warrants this time. Legal cover. You need to disappear for a few days while I clean this up. How are you going to clean this up? Dylan's voice was sharp, angry, the kind of anger that came from watching your future disintegrate. They own the narrative. They own the evidence. What are you going to do? Iris looked at him with eyes that had seen worse things than this and survived them. I'm going to find the one person who can crack their encryption and prove what they've done. I'm going to get you justice, kid, but you need to trust me. Why should I trust you? My father trusted the army. Look where that got him. The words hung in the air like smoke. Iris's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something old and painful and never fully healed. Your father was Sean Reese, she said quietly, each word measured and precise, like rounds being loaded into a chamber. Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines, married to Jennifer Marie Reese, your mother, who died of cancer when you were 7. Had a son named Dylan, born 2 years before his deployment to Iraq. 2 years and 3 months to be exact. I know because I held his hand for 16 hours in the rubble at Nasiriyah while the world burned above us, and he told me about you. Told me every detail he could remember because talking kept him conscious, and consciousness kept him alive. Told me your favorite stuffed animal was a dog named Copper, worn thin from being dragged everywhere, one ear missing from when you were 2, and tried to feed it to the family cat. Told me he was going to teach you to fish at Lake Alatuna when he got home, the same lake where his father taught him. 3 generations of Reese men learning patience and silence and how to wait for the right moment. Told me he had written you a letter, sealed it, left instructions for your mother to give it to you on your 18th birthday. Told me to make sure you knew he loved you, that he was proud of you, that being your father was the best thing he ever did, and the only thing that mattered when death was close enough to smell. Dylan's face crumpled, 20 years of carefully maintained composure breaking like a dam that had been holding back too much water for too long. Mitchell looked away, giving the kid privacy for grief that was 2 decades old but still fresh, still raw, still capable of cutting deeper than any blade. He died 3 days after we got stateside, Iris continued, her voice never wavering, even though her eyes held something that might have been tears if she allowed herself that luxury. Infection, sepsis that spread faster than the antibiotics could chase it down. We didn't have the right antibiotics, the ones that would have saved him, because the last medevac helicopter was full and someone took a spot that should have gone to medical supplies instead of personnel, someone who wasn't wounded enough to need immediate evacuation, someone who just wanted to get home faster and didn't care what that cost. That someone was Marcus Halford. Your father died because a coward wanted to avoid discomfort. And I promised Sean, with his blood on my hands and his pulse fading under my fingers, that if anything happened to him, I would look after you. I spent 19 years trying to find you, tracking you through foster records and school transfers and military enlistment papers. Took me 2 years to track you to Fort Benning, to verify you were the right Dylan Reese and not one of the 3 other soldiers with the same name. And I've been watching you ever since, making sure you were safe, making sure you had the chance your father never got, the chance to live past 29 and see your own children grow up. Why didn't you tell me? Because you didn't need a ghost from your father's past. You needed to become your own man. But now you need help, and I'm here to give it. So the question isn't whether you trust me. The question is whether you want justice or revenge. Because I can give you either, but only one of them will let you sleep at night. Dylan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, nodded. Justice. I want justice. Good, because revenge makes you like them. Justice makes you better. The name was Ethan Nash, 23 years old, Army Cyber Warfare Specialist, currently assigned to Fort Benning's Signals Intelligence Unit. According to the service record Mitchell pulled from his contacts, Nash was a rising star. Top of his class at the Army's crypto school. Multiple commendations, security clearance that went all the way to the top. And according to scuttlebutt from soldiers who knew soldiers, Nash did contract work on the side for senior officers who needed data encrypted or decrypted without official channels getting involved. He works for Halford, Mitchell said, showing Iris the file on his laptop. They were in a safe house 40 miles from Columbus, a hunting cabin owned by a veteran who asked no questions and kept no records. If we go to him, he'll turn us in. Iris studied the photo. Nash had dark eyes, sharp features, the kind of face that could blend into any crowd. But something about him nagged at her memory, something familiar she couldn't quite place. When was he born? She asked. Mitchell checked the file. March 2003. Nasiriyah, Iraq. Adopted by American family 6 months later. Iris's hands went still. March 2003. Nasiriyah, she remembered. A pregnant translator, American citizen, trapped in the bombing. Sarah Nash. Iris had delivered the baby in the rubble, in the darkness, with nothing but a flashlight and training and sheer desperate will. Cut the cord with a combat knife, wrapped the newborn in her own jacket, kept them both alive until rescue came. Sarah had died 2 days later from internal injuries Iris hadn't been able to see or treat. The baby had been evacuated stateside, placed with family, disappeared into the system. Iris had never followed up, never checked. There had been too many dead, too many wounded, too many ghosts to carry already. And now that baby was 23 years old and working for the man who had left them all to die. "I need to talk to him," Iris said. "Alone." "That's suicide." "No, it's closure. Or recruitment. We'll see which." She left before Mitchell could argue. Took her truck, drove to the address listed in Nash's file. A small apartment in a complex full of junior enlisted soldiers and contractors who worked on base but couldn't afford to live anywhere better. Third floor, corner unit. Light on in the window despite the late hour. Iris picked the lock in 12 seconds. Muscle memory from years of training that had never quite left. Moved through the apartment silent as thought. Found Nash asleep in the bedroom, laptop open on the nightstand, screen showing encrypted code that glowed green in the darkness. She stood beside the bed, waited. Let her presence disturb his subconscious the way prey animals always know when a predator is near. Nash's eyes opened. His hand moved toward the gun under the pillow. "Don't," Iris said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." Nash froze, looked at her. In the dim light from the laptop, his face was young, but his eyes were old. The eyes of someone who had grown up knowing he was different, knowing he was saved from something most people never survived. "You're Iris Corwin, the ghost. You're Ethan Nash, Sarah's son." His hand stopped moving toward the gun. "You knew my mother? I delivered you. March 19th, 2003, in the ruins of a building that doesn't exist anymore. Your mother told me to name you Ethan because it meant strong. She died 2 days later. I'm sorry I couldn't save her." Nash sat up slowly, hands visible, no sudden moves. "Why are you here?" "Because you work for Marcus Halford, and I need to know why." "He pays well." "That's not a reason. That's an excuse. Try again." Nash was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into the nightstand, pulled out a photograph. A woman in military uniform, younger, smiling. Sarah Nash. Iris recognized her even after 21 years. "They told me my mother died serving her country," Nash said. "They told me she was a hero. They didn't tell me she died because the evacuation helicopter left her behind. They didn't tell me there was room and someone took her spot. When I joined the army, I started digging. Found the after-action reports, found the manifest for that last medevac, and I found the name of the captain who took the last civilian spot. Marcus Halford. So you work for him to get close." "I work for him because I wanted to understand what kind of man leaves a pregnant woman to die. And what I found was worse than I imagined. He's been dirty for 20 years, stealing weapons, selling them, using the money to buy promotions and political favors. And I've been documenting everything. Every transaction, every communication, waiting for the right time to burn him." Iris studied his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. Found none. Just a young man carrying the weight of a mother he never knew, and a debt he could never repay. "Dylan Reese has encrypted files that prove what Halford has done. Can you decrypt them?" "Yes." "Will you?" Nash looked at the photograph of his mother, then at Iris. "You stayed when the helicopter left. You stayed with the wounded. My mother wrote about you in her journal, said you were the bravest person she'd ever met, said if anything happened to her, I should find you and thank you for trying. I failed. You tried. That's more than most people do. So yes, I'll decrypt the files. I'll help you destroy Halford, but I need something in return." "What?" "Promise me he goes to prison. Not a plea deal, not early retirement. Prison, for the rest of his life. For my mother, for all the mothers whose sons died because of him." Iris extended her hand. Nash shook it. The deal was made. The alliance forged. The ghost and the orphan, united by a city that no longer existed and a debt that could never be fully paid. The decryption took 6 hours of Nash's fingers flying over the keyboard like a concert pianist attacking a particularly complex piece, breaking through layers of military-grade encryption like they were children's locks. Like someone had thought security through obscurity was enough and never considered that the person trying to break in might be smarter than the person who built the walls. Dylan and Mitchell watched over his shoulder, silent witnesses to patterns emerging from chaos, watching the scope of Phoenix Protocol revealed in spreadsheets that catalogued death like inventory and shipping manifests that treated human lives as acceptable losses and communications that should have been destroyed years ago, but were preserved because powerful people always kept insurance against the day when their partners became their enemies. It was worse than any of them had imagined. Worse than corruption, worse than theft, worse than everything they thought they understood about how far the system could fall. Phoenix Protocol wasn't just weapons trafficking in the traditional sense of selling arms for profit. It was a systematic, carefully designed program to test American military equipment in live combat scenarios without official oversight, without congressional approval, without the ethical review boards that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of atrocity. Halford would divert weapons to insurgent groups, carefully selected groups in regions where American forces were already deployed, then collect data on their use in actual firefights through a network of informants, embedded intelligence assets, and soldiers who didn't realize they were being used as unwitting test subjects. Kill rates measured against ammunition expended. Failure rates documented under different environmental conditions. Performance metrics in desert heat, mountain cold, urban combat, rural ambush scenarios. All the data that couldn't be gathered from controlled testing. All the variables that only emerged when real bullets flew at real targets and real people died from real mistakes in design or manufacturing or tactical deployment. The data was then sold to defense contractors for millions of dollars per quarter. Used to refine designs and win contracts worth billions. Used to demonstrate real-world performance in ways that no amount of laboratory testing could replicate. The contractors knew where the data came from. Had to know, but they paid anyway because competitive advantage in the defense industry was worth any price, any moral compromise, any number of deaths that could be attributed to combat instead of conspiracy. The human cost was itemized in a separate file, organized by year and theater of operations, each entry a name and a service number and a cause of death that should have triggered investigations, but never did because the system was designed to absorb casualties without asking questions. Conservative estimate, 2,400 direct casualties. Soldiers who died or were wounded by American weapons that should never have been in enemy hands. Weapons that were supposed to be locked in American armories or destroyed as obsolete or accounted for in official inventories. Soldiers whose deaths were logged as combat losses, unavoidable, the cost of war, the price of freedom, all the phrases that turned individual tragedies into acceptable statistics. No one investigating how the insurgents got M4 rifles that could be traced to specific shipments. No one asking why enemy combatants had AT-4 rockets with serial numbers that matched Fort Benning inventory. No one wondering how poorly equipped militias suddenly possessed night vision equipment that cost more per unit than most American families earned in 6 months. Mitchell found his daughter's name in the casualty list, her entry highlighted in red because she was classified as high-priority loss. An NCO with leadership potential whose death represented not just a personal tragedy, but a quantifiable reduction in unit effectiveness. Sergeant Melissa Ann Mitchell. Killed in action, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, October 14, 2019. Cause of death, enemy fire from weapons traced to a shipment that went missing from Fort Benning 3 months earlier. Weapons that Marcus Halford had personally certified as destroyed in a training accident, complete with photographs of burned-out husks that turned out to be props purchased from a military surplus dealer in Alabama. And the Army had given her a hero's funeral, flag-draped coffin and 3-volley salute, and a colonel who looked Mitchell in the eye and said his daughter died serving her country, never knowing or never caring that she died because her country had armed the people who killed her. His hands shook as he read the report. His daughter had been killed by American weapons, stolen by an American officer, sold to the enemy for profit and data, and the Army had given her a hero's funeral and never asked why the insurgents had better equipment than she did. Iris put a hand on his shoulder, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Some grief was too deep for words. "I'm going to kill him," Mitchell said quietly. "I'm going to put a bullet in his head, and I don't care what happens after." "No," Iris said, "you're not. He killed my daughter. He killed a lot of people's daughters and sons, and if you kill him, he becomes a martyr. His lawyer spins him as a victim of a vendetta. The evidence gets suppressed, and Phoenix Protocol continues with someone else in charge. Is that what Melissa would want?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. Tears ran down his face, but he made no sound, just stood there, shaking, while 2 decades of grief and rage fought for control. "What would she want?" Iris asked gently. "Justice or revenge?" Mitchell took a long, shuddering breath. "Justice. She'd want justice. She always believed in the system, even when it failed her. Then we give her justice. We put Halford and everyone above him in prison. We expose Phoenix Protocol. We make sure no other father loses his daughter to American weapons in enemy hands. We honor her by being better than him. Mitchell nodded slowly, wiped his eyes, looked at Dylan. Your father would be proud of you, kid. You could have walked away, could have ignored the numbers that didn't add up. But you didn't. You chose to see. That takes courage. Dylan looked uncomfortable with the praise. I just counted boxes. You're the ones risking everything. Counting boxes is how you start changing the world, seeing what's wrong and refusing to look away. That's heroism. The loud kind gets medals. The quiet kind saves lives. Nash closed his laptop. I have everything. Complete financial records, communication logs, shipping manifests, casualty reports. Enough to put Halford away for 40 years and implicate at least 20 other officers. But there's a problem. What problem? Iris asked. The data is stored on encrypted servers. I can access it, but if someone has admin credentials, they can wipe it remotely. All of it, gone in seconds, and according to the server logs, someone has been accessing these files. Someone with higher clearance than Halford. Who? I don't know. The access logs are spoofed, but whoever it is, they've been watching this investigation. They know about Dylan's evidence. They know about your involvement, and they're preparing a countermove. Iris felt the pieces falling into place. The mysterious woman on the phone. The coordinated response. The narrative control. Someone bigger than Halford was running Phoenix Protocol. Someone with resources and connections that went far beyond a colonel at Fort Benning. We need to move fast, she said, before they can erase the evidence, before they can spin the narrative. We need to get everything to people who can't be bought or threatened. Multiple sources, multiple agencies. Flood the system so thoroughly they can't contain it. How? Dylan asked. We infiltrate Fort Benning, access the primary server, upload everything to a distributed network. Pentagon, FBI, DOJ, major newspapers, international watchdog groups. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late to stop it. Mitchell stared at her. You can't infiltrate Fort Benning. Security has been tripled since your arrest of Halford. They know you're coming. They know the ghost is coming. They don't know when or how, and they're expecting tactics from 20 years ago. But I've been studying that base for 7 years. I know things they don't know. Blind spots they've forgotten exist. Access points that aren't in any official documentation. It's suicide. Maybe, but it's the only play we have, and I've been dead before. It didn't take. The plan was simple, in the way that all suicide missions are simple. Iris would infiltrate Fort Benning at 0300 hours, during the shift change that created a 7-minute gap in active monitoring. She would enter through the steam tunnels that connected the old buildings, tunnels that hadn't been used in 15 years, but were still technically accessible if you knew where the maintenance hatches were. She would reach the server room in Building C. She would plug in Nash's drive. The upload would take 12 minutes, and then she would be trapped, because there was no exit strategy that didn't involve her getting caught or killed. But the data would be out, the truth would be public, and Halford would go to prison even if she didn't make it out to see it happen. Nash tried to talk her out of it. Said he could remote access the servers, bypass the need for physical infiltration. But Iris knew better. Remote access left digital footprints, could be traced, could be blocked. Physical access was old school but effective, and it meant putting herself in danger instead of asking someone else to take the risk. I'm 60 years old, she told Nash. I've lived on borrowed time for 21 years. If this is where it ends, that's fine. I made peace with dying in Nasiriyah. Everything since then has been extra innings. She left at 0200 hours, when human attention spans were at their lowest, and shift changes created predictable gaps in coverage that no amount of training could eliminate because human beings were fundamentally unreliable in ways that machines were not. Drove to Fort Benning in her truck, taking back roads that avoided traffic cameras and toll booth surveillance, parking 3 miles away in a shopping center lot where one more vehicle would blend into the landscape of abandoned commerce. Walked the rest of the distance through woods that had once been farmland before the base expanded and swallowed everything around it like a hungry organism. The night was warm and humid, the kind of Georgia heat that made your clothes stick to your skin like a second layer and your breath come heavy and wet. Air thick enough to taste. She moved slow, conserving energy, letting her body remember the rhythm of tactical movement learned decades ago and practiced in dreams and nightmares ever since. Low to the ground, quiet in the way that required conscious effort and muscle control. Invisible through patience rather than technology. The maintenance hatch was where she remembered, hidden behind a commercial dumpster that hadn't been moved in years, based on the rust patterns and the small ecosystem of weeds growing around its wheels. She popped the lock with a tension wrench and pick made from spring steel, tools that had followed her through 21 years and a dozen infiltrations that never made it into any official record. Dropped into darkness that smelled like rust and stagnant water and something organic that had died down here and been forgotten. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders even turned sideways, the ceiling low enough that she had to crouch and shuffle forward in a position that made her old injury scream with every step. Her left leg ached from the shattered femur that had healed wrong because field medicine in 2003 Iraq was about keeping you alive, not keeping you comfortable. But she ignored the pain, the way she ignored hunger and thirst and fear and every other biological signal that interfered with the mission. Pain was information. You acknowledged it and moved on. You didn't let it control you. She navigated by memory and a penlight held between her teeth, the narrow beam revealing concrete walls covered in decades of condensation and graffiti from maintenance workers who thought no one would ever read their messages. Left at the junction where 3 tunnels met, beneath what used to be the old motor pool. Straight for 200 meters past pipes that dripped something viscous and probably toxic. Right at the pressure valve, marked with faded yellow paint that indicated steam lines from the heating system. Up through the access ladder that brought her into the basement of Building C, emerging through a floor grate into a mechanical room that smelled like oil and ozone and contained enough electrical equipment to power a small city. The server room was on the 3rd floor. She took the stairs, avoiding elevators that logged every use. Each floor had cameras, but she knew their positions, knew the blind spots, moved through them like water through cracks in stone. Invisible, patient, inevitable. The server room door was locked with a keypad, 8-digit code. She had watched the system administrator enter it 6 times over the past month through a micro camera hidden in the ceiling tile. Muscle memory from 20 feet away. She entered the code. The lock clicked open. Inside, the servers hummed with the sound of 1,000 hard drives spinning, processing, storing the secrets that men like Halford thought were safe. Iris found the primary node, plugged in Nash's drive. The upload began. 12 minutes. She waited in the darkness, watching the progress bar crawl across the tiny screen. 70,000 files, 400 gigabytes of evidence. Every transaction, every death, every lie. At the 9-minute mark, the alarm went off. They had been waiting for her, had known she would come, had set a trap that was patient and perfect, and now closing around her like a fist. The lights died, emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in red. Iris heard boots in the hallway. Tactical teams moving with the efficiency of men who had trained for exactly this scenario. She pulled the Glock from her waistband, checked the magazine. 17 rounds. Not enough for what was coming, but enough to make them earn it. The door crashed open. 6 soldiers, night vision, automatic weapons. Iris fired 3 times. Not at them, at the overhead lights, at the emergency power conduits, at the things that would make their technology useless. Total darkness. Even the red emergency lights died. The soldiers shouted, confused, their night vision suddenly worthless in absolute zero light. Iris moved, not away, toward them, using the sound of their breathing to navigate, using her intimate knowledge of the room's layout to become a ghost in truth as well as name. She took down the first soldier with her cane, swinging it like a club into his knee, hearing bone crack, feeling him drop. The second soldier turned toward the sound, fired blind, hit his own man. Iris was already moving, already behind him, striking the nerve cluster at the base of his neck, watching him collapse. The remaining 4 soldiers retreated to the hallway, regrouped, called for backup. Iris used the time to check the upload. 11 minutes, almost done. She barricaded the door with a server rack, bought herself another 60 seconds. They came through the wall instead. Breaching charge that blew a hole in the drywall, sending debris and smoke and fragments of acoustic tile into the air. Iris dropped low, fired 4 rounds through the smoke at center mass height, Heard someone grunt, heard someone fall. The upload finished. 100%. Nash's program executed its secondary function, deleting itself from the drive, leaving no trace that couldn't be explained as a routine system backup. The evidence was out. Distributed, backed up on 47 different servers across 3 continents. Unhackable. Undeletable. Permanent. Iris dropped the drive, crushed it under her boot, raised her hands. "I'm done," she called out, coming out unarmed. The remaining soldiers swarmed in, weapons trained, ready to fire. But she was already on her knees, hands behind her head. No threat. They zip-tied her wrists, searched her for weapons, found nothing but the empty pistol and the cane she used to walk. They dragged her to her feet, pushed her toward the door, and that's when the screens in the server room lit up, all of them. Simultaneously, showing a face Iris recognized from old photos but had never seen in person. Senator Catherine Vale, 60 years old, perfectly composed. Eyes that had seen the inside of hell and come back with a business plan. "Iris Corwin," Vale said, her voice coming through the server room speakers with the clarity of digital perfection. "We need to talk, alone." The soldiers looked at each other. One of them spoke into his radio. Received orders. They withdrew, leaving Iris alone in the room with her hands bound and a woman on a screen who held all the cards. "You're the voice from the phone calls," Iris said. "I am. And you have been quite impressive. 7 years of planning. Flawless execution. You've destroyed Marcus Halford's career, exposed Phoenix Protocol, and uploaded enough evidence to put 23 officers in prison. Congratulations. You won. Then why are you smiling? Because you've only won the battle you knew you were fighting. You don't even realize the war you just started." Iris felt cold spreading through her chest. "Who are you?" "I was in Nasiriyah, March 2003. Not in your building, in the one next door. I was a lieutenant in military intelligence, 25 years old, trapped under concrete when the bombing happened. I heard you working, heard you saving people, counted the voices you pulled out. 8 people. You saved 8 people and left before checking if there were more. I didn't know anyone else was there. Of course you didn't, because you were focused on the people you could see, the people you could save. You didn't think about the ones you couldn't see, the ones who weren't screaming loud enough, the ones who weren't important enough. I saved everyone I could find. You saved everyone you prioritized. And I wasn't a priority. I was military intelligence, not infantry, not a medic, not important enough to waste time searching for. So I stayed buried for 14 hours, lost my left leg below the knee, lost my ability to have children, spent 14 months in a coma. And when I woke up, I understood something fundamental about the military, about the system, about how the world actually works." Vale's smile was cold and perfect and utterly without mercy. "The system only saves people it considers valuable. Everyone else is collateral damage. So I spent 21 years building my own system. A system that ensures American soldiers have the best weapons, the best training, the best equipment. Phoenix Protocol wasn't about money. It was about saving lives. Every weapon we tested, every data point we gathered, every insurgent we armed and then monitored, it all served one purpose: making sure American soldiers don't die from equipment failure. You killed 2,400 people. I saved 24,000. Do the math, Iris. War is about acceptable losses. You understand that. You made those calculations in Nasiriyah when you decided who to save and who to leave behind. I just made them on a larger scale." Iris pulled against the zip ties, felt them cut into her wrists. "You're insane. I'm pragmatic, and I'm offering you a choice. Work with me. Use your skills, your experience, your knowledge of combat medicine to help design Phoenix Protocol 2.0. No casualties. Pure simulation and data modeling. We can save more lives than you ever saved in the field. We can honor the people who died by making sure others don't. And if I refuse, then I press a button and every piece of evidence you just uploaded disappears. Every server, every backup, gone. I designed the security protocols for Pentagon data storage. You think I left myself vulnerable, and then I'll make sure Dylan Reese goes to prison for murder. Grant Mitchell gets charged as an accomplice. Ethan Nash loses his security clearance and his career. Everyone you're trying to protect gets destroyed. And you get charged with espionage, treason, and the murder of 2 soldiers during your infiltration tonight. I didn't kill anyone. Evidence says otherwise. And evidence is what I control. Iris looked at the screen, at the woman who had spent 21 years building an empire out of rage and trauma, and a choice Iris had made without even knowing she was making it. A choice to save 8 people and not search for a 9th. A choice that seemed obvious at the time. A choice that had cost more than she could have imagined. You're giving me until morning, Vale said. Think about it. Work with me and save lives, or refuse and watch everyone you care about get destroyed. Choose wisely, Ghost, because this time there's no rubble to hide in. This time, you either join the system or the system buries you. The screen went dark. Iris stood alone in the server room, hands bound, wounded, trapped. But in her pocket, hidden where they hadn't searched, was a second drive, a backup of the backup, because she had learned something in 21 years of hunting corrupt officers. Always have a contingency. Always assume the enemy is smarter than you think. And never, ever put all your evidence in one place. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase, and Senator Catherine Vale was about to learn that ghosts didn't negotiate. They haunted, they hunted, and they never stopped until justice was served. The zip ties cut into Iris Corwin's wrists, but she didn't move, didn't struggle, didn't give Catherine Vale the satisfaction of seeing discomfort or weakness, or any of the things that powerful people fed on when they had you trapped. The server room hummed around her with the mechanical precision of 1,000 hard drives spinning their secrets, processing data that could end careers and start wars, storing the kind of information that nations killed to protect or expose. And somewhere in that sea of ones and zeros was the evidence that would either save her or destroy everyone she cared about. Depending on whether her gamble had paid off or whether she had finally miscalculated after 21 years of getting it right. Catherine Vale's face on the screen was perfectly composed, the kind of control that came from years of hiding pain behind political smiles and fundraising speeches and the performative empathy that voters demanded from their senators. 60 years old, but could pass for 50 with the right lighting and makeup. Expensive suit that probably cost more than most soldiers made in a month, tailored to disguise the prosthetic leg that most people didn't know she had, because she had learned to walk without a limp through sheer force of will and thousands of hours of physical therapy. Hair styled with the casual precision of someone who paid professionals to make her look effortlessly powerful, as if beauty and authority were natural states rather than carefully constructed facades. But her eyes gave her away. They held the kind of rage that never healed, never softened, never forgave. The eyes of someone who had died once in the rubble of a city that no longer existed and spent 2 decades building an empire out of that death, transforming trauma into power through sheer bloody-minded determination. The eyes of someone who understood that survival wasn't enough, that you had to win, had to dominate, had to make sure that no one ever left you behind again because you were too important to abandon. You have until 0600 hours, Vale said, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone used to being obeyed without question. 6 hours to decide. Work with me and help save American lives through Phoenix Protocol 2.0, or refuse and watch everyone connected to you get destroyed. Dylan Reese will be convicted of murder and treason. Grant Mitchell will be charged as an accomplice to domestic terrorism. Ethan Nash will lose his security clearance, his career, and quite probably his freedom. And you will spend the rest of your life in a supermax prison, isolated 23 hours a day, with nothing but your memories and your guilt to keep you company. You're bluffing, Iris said quietly. The evidence is already out, distributed to 47 different servers. You can't erase all of it. Vale smiled. The expression was colder than anything Iris had seen in 2 decades of hunting corrupt officers. Can't I? I designed the security architecture for Pentagon data storage. I have administrative access to every military server in the continental United States. And the civilian servers, the news organizations, the watchdog groups, they all use cloud storage providers that my company consults for. 1 command, 7 seconds of execution time. Every piece of evidence you uploaded tonight disappears like it never existed. And then I release doctored versions that show you fabricated everything, that you're a disturbed veteran suffering from PTSD and paranoid delusions, that you've been stalking Marcus Halford for years because you blame him for your injuries in Nasiriyah, The narrative writes itself. Tragic, almost sympathetic, but ultimately just another broken soldier who couldn't handle the weight of service. Iris felt the truth of it settling in her chest like a stone. Vale wasn't making empty threats. She had the power, had the access, had spent 21 years building a system that protected itself through redundancy and control, and the kind of deep integration that made it nearly impossible to tear down without destroying everything around it. Nearly impossible, but not quite. You made a mistake, Iris said. Did I? You told me your story. Told me you were in Nasiriyah. Told me I didn't save you. You gave me information I didn't have before. And information is the only weapon that matters. Vale's smile faded slightly. What information? That I survived? That I built Phoenix Protocol out of rage at being abandoned? How does knowing that help you? Because now I know who you are. I can prove you were there. I can prove you had motive. I can connect you to every decision, every death, every cover-up. You're not invisible anymore. You're a person with a history and a grudge and a pattern of behavior that forensic investigators can trace. You just gave me the missing piece. It won't matter if the evidence disappears. Then I guess you better delete it. Go ahead, press your button, erase everything I uploaded, see what happens. Vale's finger hovered over something off-screen. Her expression shifted, uncertainty creeping in at the edges of her perfect control. You're bluffing. Am I? 7 years I've been planning this. You think I put all my evidence in one place? You think I trusted a system that people like you control? I've been a ghost for 21 years, Senator. Ghosts learn to leave traces that only appear when you're not looking for them. So go ahead, delete the files I uploaded tonight. Find out if I'm bluffing. The screen went dark. Iris stood alone in the server room, hands still bound, blood from a cut on her forehead dripping into her left eye. She had maybe 2 minutes before the soldiers came back. 2 minutes to pray that Ethan Nash was half as good as she thought he was. 2 minutes to hope that the backup plan she had put in motion 6 months ago was actually going to work. The door opened. Not soldiers. Ethan Nash, moving fast, a stolen security badge clipped to his shirt and a combat knife in his hand. He cut through the zip ties in one smooth motion, caught Iris as her hands came free, and the blood rushed back into her fingers with pins and needles intensity. Did it work? She asked. Vale just tried to execute her deletion protocol, but I modified the server code 3 weeks ago when I was doing routine maintenance. Her command didn't delete the evidence. It copied it to another 200 servers she doesn't know exist. Government servers, international servers, servers in countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. By trying to destroy the evidence, she just made it indestructible. Iris felt something uncoil in her chest. Not quite hope, something harder, something closer to certainty. Where is she now? Still in her office in D.C., probably staring at her screen, wondering why the deletion confirmation is taking so long. She'll figure it out in about 3 minutes, and when she does, she's going to run. Then we need to make sure she doesn't get far. Senator Catherine Vale stared at her computer screen with growing dread. The deletion protocol should have executed in 7 seconds. Should have wiped every trace of the Phoenix Protocol evidence from every server Iris Corwin had uploaded to. Should have left nothing but ghosts and fragments that could be dismissed as corrupted data or fabricated documents. But the progress bar was stuck at 42%, had been stuck for 90 seconds, and the estimated time remaining kept increasing. 7 seconds had become 15, then 30, then 2 minutes, then 5, and now her screen was showing an error message she had never seen before. Error, deletion blocked by administrative override. Evidence replication in progress. Contact system administrator. She was the system administrator. She had designed this system. There was no higher authority, no override protocol, no way for someone to block her commands unless they had access she hadn't granted, unless someone had been inside her system for weeks or months. Changing code, planting backdoors, preparing for exactly this moment. Ethan Nash, the crypto specialist who worked for Halford, the young man she had cultivated as an asset, fed information to, used to monitor Iris Corwin's investigation. He had been playing her, had been working against her while pretending to work for her. And she had never suspected because she was so certain of her own intelligence, so confident in her ability to manipulate people, that she never considered she might be the one being manipulated. Her phone rang. Blocked number. She answered anyway because at this point there was nothing left to lose. Because all the careful planning and contingency protocols had failed. Because Iris Corwin had beaten her at a game Vale thought she owned. Senator Vale, a man's voice, older than her, maybe 70, with the kind of authority that came from decades of service in the shadows where real power lived, the places where elected officials were tools rather than masters. This is Deputy Director Marcus Chen, National Security Agency, Signals Intelligence Directorate. I'm calling to inform you that you are under investigation for weapons trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to terrorism, and treason. Federal agents are en route to your location with warrants for your arrest and the seizure of your electronic devices. I strongly advise you to remain where you are and cooperate fully with the arresting officers. Vale's hands were shaking, a tremor she couldn't control, no matter how hard she tried to maintain the composure that had served her through 1,000 difficult conversations. This is a mistake. I have congressional immunity for official acts. I have connections at the highest levels of the Department of Justice and the Pentagon. You can't touch me without triggering a constitutional crisis. Your immunity expired the moment you threatened to delete evidence from government servers. That's not an official act, Senator. That's obstruction of justice and destruction of federal property. Your connections are being arrested as we speak in a coordinated operation across 7 states and the District of Columbia. 23 officers, 4 defense contractors, and 2 other senators. We've been building this case for 18 months, waiting for the right moment. And we can absolutely touch you. In fact, we've been touching you since the moment Iris Corwin walked into our field office in Atlanta with a flash drive containing preliminary evidence of Phoenix Protocol and a proposition that was too good to refuse. Vale felt the floor dropping out from under her, felt the careful architecture of her empire collapsing like the building in Nasiriyah had collapsed, sudden and total and leaving nothing but rubble. You've been monitoring me for 18 months. That's illegal surveillance of a sitting senator. That's a violation of separation of powers. We had a FISA warrant signed by a federal judge based on probable cause that you were engaged in activities that threatened national security. 3 judges, actually. We wanted to make sure the paperwork was bulletproof, and we didn't just monitor you, Senator. We monitored everyone connected to Phoenix Protocol. Every communication, every financial transaction, every meeting and phone call and encrypted message. We watched you build your network, and we documented every single crime. We just needed the last piece. The confession, the moment when you admitted what you had done and why you had done it. And Iris Corwin delivered it tonight. How? I spoke to her in a secure server room. No recording devices, no witnesses, just her and me. Chen's voice carried something that might have been amusement, if amusement was compatible with the gravity of arresting a United States senator. You spoke to her in a server room equipped with military-grade surveillance equipment that we installed 6 months ago when Corwin came to us with enough evidence to make us take her seriously. Every word you said tonight was recorded in high definition with voice pattern analysis and facial recognition confirmation. Every threat, every admission, every detail about Nasiriyah and your motivation for building Phoenix Protocol. And it's already been entered into evidence in 3 separate federal courts with grand jury indictments sealed and ready to unseal the moment you're in custody. You're done, Senator. And so is everyone who worked with you. Marcus Halford, Victor Crane, and 21 other officers are being arrested simultaneously. The defense contractors who bought your data are being raided. The pharmaceutical companies involved in the VA contamination scheme are being shut down. We're dismantling the entire network in one night because you taught us something important. If you leave even one thread loose, the powerful people find a way to pull it and unravel everything. So we're not leaving threads, we're burning the whole tapestry. The line went dead. Vale sat in her office, the silence pressing in around her like water filling a submarine with a ruptured hull, and understood for the first time in 21 years what it felt like to be completely, utterly powerless. To be trapped with no escape route, no allies who hadn't already been arrested or turned state's evidence, no clever plan that would save her at the last moment, because someone smarter had anticipated every move and countered it before she made it. She had spent 2 decades building an empire out of rage and pain, and the memory of being abandoned in Nasiriyah while Iris Corwin saved 8 people and never looked for a ninth had turned her survival into a weapon, her trauma into justification for every awful thing she had done, her disability into proof that she was stronger than the people who had left her behind, had convinced herself that she was saving lives through Phoenix Protocol, that the casualties were acceptable losses in service of a greater good, that the ends justified any means, including arming insurgents and testing weapons on American soldiers and building a criminal network that spanned 3 continents. And now that empire was collapsing around her because she had underestimated a 60-year-old combat medic who walked with a cane and still remembered every promise she had ever made, every person she had saved, and apparently every person she hadn't saved well enough to prevent them from becoming monsters. Vale stood up, walked to her office window, looked down at the street where federal vehicles were already arriving, lights flashing, agents moving with the practiced efficiency of people executing a warrant they had been waiting months to serve. She could run, could try to disappear, had contingency plans and escape routes and money hidden in accounts under names that didn't officially exist. But what was the point? Iris Corwin had taught her something tonight. Ghosts couldn't be outrun, and some debts could never be escaped. Vale was still standing at the window when the agents came through her door. Marcus Halford's arrest happened at 0600 hours, coordinated with Vale's arrest to prevent either of them from warning the other. Federal agents and CID officers arrived simultaneously, overwhelming the private security Halford had hired with his bail money, executing warrants that had been sealed until the moment they were served. The charges had multiplied. What started as weapons trafficking had expanded to include conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to treason, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other counts that collectively added up to the rest of his life behind bars. They found him in his study, surrounded by legal documents and empty bottles. A man who had spent the night trying to find a way out and discovering that all the exits were blocked. He didn't resist, didn't make speeches about injustice or persecution, just stood up, put his hands behind his back, and accepted the handcuffs with the blank expression of someone who had run out of options and excuses. As they led him out, past neighbors who filmed everything on their phones, past reporters who had somehow already gotten word of the arrest, Halford saw Iris Corwin standing beside an unmarked car. She was still wearing the same clothes from the infiltration, still had dried blood on her face from the cut she had sustained during the fight, still carried that titanium cane that had become as much a part of her identity as the scars she didn't talk about. Their eyes met. Halford wanted to say something, wanted to justify himself, wanted to make her understand that he had been doing what anyone would do in his position. Surviving, advancing, making the hard choices that someone had to make. But the words died in his throat because he saw something in her eyes that made them irrelevant. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a kind of weary certainty that justice had been delayed, but not denied, that the scales had finally balanced, that the dead could rest now because someone had remembered them. Iris nodded once, a small gesture, acknowledgement without forgiveness, recognition without reconciliation. Then she turned and walked away, the cane clicking on the pavement, and Marcus Halford understood that he would spend the rest of his life haunted by that sound. The trials took 8 months of testimony and evidence presentation, 8 months of federal prosecutors building cases that were methodical and overwhelming and left no room for reasonable doubt. Catherine Vale's trial was first because she was the architect, the mastermind, the person who had turned personal trauma into systematic criminal enterprise. The prosecution presented evidence that filled courtrooms and required 3 separate juries because no single jury could process the scope of what she had done. 17 counts, including weapons trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to terrorism, obstruction of justice, and treason. Each count backed by thousands of pages of documentation, hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, financial records that traced every dollar through shell companies and offshore accounts, and testimony from soldiers who had survived firefights against insurgents armed with American weapons they recognized from their own armories. The defense tried everything, argued that Vale was a whistleblower trying to improve military equipment through unorthodox means, argued that the casualties were unavoidable consequences of war rather than results of criminal conspiracy. argued that Vale's trauma from Nasiriyah had created diminished capacity, argued that the NSA surveillance was unconstitutional and all evidence should be suppressed. Every argument failed because the evidence was too strong, too detailed, too corroborated by multiple independent sources. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all 17 counts. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without possibility of parole, citing the magnitude of betrayal involved in using her position as a senator to orchestrate the deaths of soldiers she had sworn to protect. Marcus Halford's trial was shorter because he cooperated, provided testimony against Vale and the defense contractors, detailed the mechanics of how weapons were diverted and data was collected. But cooperation didn't buy him freedom. The prosecution made clear that Halford had been corrupt long before Vale recruited him, that his decision to abandon wounded soldiers in Nasiriyah had been the first in a long series of choices that valued his career over other people's lives. 40 years was the sentence. At 62 years old, it was a life sentence in everything but name. He would die in prison, and everyone involved made sure he knew it. Victor Crane and 21 other officers received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years, depending on their level of involvement and willingness to cooperate. Some had been willing participants who knew exactly what Phoenix Protocol was doing. Others had been useful idiots who followed orders without asking questions. The courts made distinctions, but everyone went to prison because ignorance wasn't an excuse when the ignorance was willful and the consequences were measured in thousands of dead soldiers. The Phoenix Protocol itself was dismantled piece by piece. The weapons that had been diverted were recovered from insurgent groups through military operations and diplomatic pressure. The financial networks were frozen and their assets seized. Billions of dollars that had been hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies now redirected to veteran support programs and families of soldiers who had died because of the program. Defense contractors who had knowingly purchased the combat data were fined amounts that made their stock prices collapse and their executives face shareholder lawsuits and criminal charges. Politicians who had provided cover were forced to resign in disgrace. Their careers ended not by voters but by federal prosecutors with evidence that couldn't be spun or explained away. The entire operation that Catherine Vale had built over 2 decades, that had seemed untouchable because it was protected by powerful people and hidden behind layers of classification and national security justifications, collapsed in less than a year. Collapsed because one 60-year-old woman with a cane had refused to forget, had spent 7 years gathering evidence, had made alliances with people who still believed in justice, and had been patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. But the victims couldn't be brought back. The 2,400 soldiers who had died because of American weapons in enemy hands stayed dead. Their families received formal apologies and financial compensation, but apologies didn't fill empty chairs at holiday dinners, and money didn't erase the grief of burying someone who should have come home. Grant Mitchell stood at his daughter's grave on a cold morning in November, 6 months after the trials ended. The headstone was simple: Sergeant Melissa Ann Mitchell, 1994 to 2019. Beloved daughter and dedicated soldier. He had visited every week for 5 years, talking to Stone because he had no one else to talk to about the things that mattered. Today he wasn't alone. Iris stood beside him, silent, giving him space for whatever he needed to say or not say. She would have been 30, Mitchell said quietly. Would have finished her enlistment, maybe stayed in, maybe gotten out. She talked about teaching, about working with kids who needed someone to believe in them, said she wanted to do for others what the army did for her. Give them structure and purpose and a reason to be proud. She would have been good at it, Iris said. Yeah, she would have. Mitchell's voice cracked. He didn't try to hide it. I keep thinking about the moment she died, about whether she knew, whether she had time to be scared or if it was fast enough that she didn't feel anything. I keep thinking about the last thing she said to me. It was "Love you, Dad," on a video call 3 days before the ambush. And I said, "Love you too, kiddo." And we hung up and I never heard her voice again. There's nothing I can say that makes it better. I know. But you made sure the people who killed her are in prison. You made sure she didn't die for nothing. You gave her justice. That's more than most parents get. That's something I can hold on to. They stood in silence for a long time, 2 people who had survived wars that never really ended, who carried ghosts that never really left, who understood that some wounds never healed. but you learned to live with them anyway. Finally, Mitchell spoke again. What are you going to do now? You've spent 7 years hunting Halford, 21 years making sure people like him face consequences. What happens when the mission's over? Iris looked at the rows of headstones stretching across the cemetery, each one representing a life that ended too soon and a family that would never be whole again. The mission's never over. There are always more people like Halford, always more corrupt officers trading lives for advancement, always more cover-ups and conspiracies and powerful people who think they're above consequences. I can't stop all of it, but I can stop some of it. That's enough. You can't do this forever. You're 60 years old. I'll do it as long as I can, and when I can't anymore, I'll make sure someone else knows how. Someone who'll keep going when I'm gone. Mitchell nodded. He understood. Some debts could only be paid forward. Some promises were kept by passing them to the next generation. They left the cemetery together, two ghosts who had outlived their wars and chosen to keep fighting anyway. Fort Benning had a new commanding officer and a new mission. The weapons that had gone missing were accounted for. The corruption that had infected every level of the logistics operation was being systematically rooted out and replaced with oversight and accountability. It would take years to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, but the work had begun. Iris Corwin stood in front of a classroom at the Fort Benning Training Center, 42 students in combat medic school looking at her with the mixture of respect and uncertainty that always came when someone with a reputation walked into a room. She was their guest instructor for advanced combat medicine, brought in because someone in the chain of command remembered what she had done in Nasiriyah and decided that knowledge like hers should be passed on before it was lost. Lesson 1, Karen, she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience that couldn't be faked or taught from a textbook. The kind of knowledge that came from making impossible choices in situations where every option led to someone dying, and you had to choose which deaths you could live with. In combat, you will make choices about who lives and who dies. Not theoretical choices, not hypothetical scenarios you discuss in air-conditioned classrooms. Real choices about real people who have families and futures and plans that will never happen because you decided someone else's life mattered more in that specific moment. You will have more casualties than you have time or supplies or physical ability to save. You will have to prioritize. Triage isn't an academic exercise. It's deciding that this soldier with the sucking chest wound gets treatment, while that soldier with the abdominal injury gets morphine and a hand to hold while they die, because you don't have time for both, and choosing wrong means they both die. And those choices will follow you for the rest of your life. They will wake you up at 3 in the morning 20 years later. They will make you wonder what the person you didn't save would have become if you had chosen differently. They will make you question everything about yourself and whether you're a good person or just someone who got lucky with impossible math. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the metal chairs creaking in the silence that followed. This wasn't the sanitized version of combat medicine they learned in basic training, where every scenario had a right answer and every casualty could be saved if you just followed the proper protocols. This was the truth that veterans carried in the spaces between heartbeats and civilians couldn't understand, no matter how many movies they watched or books they read. I'm going to tell you about Nasiriyah, March 2003. A building collapsed from a bombing. 17 people buried in the rubble. Could have been more, could have been less. I only knew about 17 because those were the ones I could hear screaming or see bleeding or touch with my hands. I was one of them, trapped under concrete and rebar with a shattered femur and probably a concussion and definitely more adrenaline than any human body should have to process. I had a choice. I could save the people I could see, the people who were screaming and bleeding and obviously critical, the people whose injuries I could assess and prioritize. Or I could spend time searching for people I couldn't see, people who might not exist, people who might already be dead, people who might be fine and just trapped without injuries. I chose to save the 8 people I could see. I didn't search for others, didn't call out to see if anyone answered, didn't do a systematic grid search of the rubble, just focused on the casualties in front of me and worked until rescue arrived 16 hours later. And because I didn't search, a 9th person stayed buried for 14 more hours. Lieutenant Evelyn Ross, military intelligence, lost her left leg below the knee, lost her ability to have children, spent 14 months in a coma, lived, but at a cost I never intended and never would have chosen if I had known she was there. She paused, letting them absorb that, letting them understand that the choices they would make in combat had consequences that rippled out in ways they couldn't predict, couldn't control, couldn't undo, no matter how much they wanted to. That person, Evelyn Ross, spent 21 years building a criminal empire out of rage at being abandoned. Changed her name to Catherine Vale, became a senator, created Phoenix Protocol, a weapons trafficking and testing operation that killed 2,400 American soldiers through arming insurgents and collecting combat data for defense contractors. 4,700 more wounded, families destroyed, careers ended, all because I made a choice in a collapsed building without all the information I needed. All because I prioritized 8 lives I could see over 1 life I couldn't see. A hand went up. Young woman, maybe 23, corporal stripes. Are you saying you were wrong to save those 8 people? No, I'm saying choices in combat are never clean, never simple. You do the best you can with the information you have and the time you have and the resources you have. And sometimes the best you can do still leads to tragedy. But you make the choice anyway, because not choosing is also a choice. And that choice kills everyone. Another hand. Young man, private first class, couldn't be more than 20. How do you live with it? Knowing that your choices had consequences you didn't intend. Iris looked at him, at the earnest face and the honest question, and decided to give him an honest answer. You live with it by understanding that intention matters, but results matter more. You live with it by trying to do better next time. You live with it by making sure the people who died because of your choices didn't die for nothing. And you live with it by passing on what you learned so the next person in your position makes better choices than you did. She spent 3 hours with them, walking through scenarios and decision trees and the kind of field medicine that wasn't in any manual because it came from experience and improvisation and the desperate creativity that emerged when everything was going wrong and you still had to save someone. She taught them how to prioritize casualties when resources were limited, how to make a tourniquet from anything available, how to keep someone conscious and fighting when their body wanted to shut down, how to be the calm voice in chaos that other people could hold on to when everything else was falling apart. And at the end, when the class was dismissed and the students filed out with more questions than answers, one of them stayed behind. Dylan Reese, no longer a private first class. Corporal now, promoted after his name was cleared and his record expunged. But more than that, a student in the combat medic program. He had re-enrolled after the trials, after Phoenix Protocol was exposed, after everything he thought he knew about the army had been revealed as rotten and corrupt and in need of people who still believed in doing things right. You came, Iris said. You told me I should. Told me that being a medic was about more than treating wounds, about being the person who remembers, about carrying the weight so others don't have to. Your father would be proud. Dylan's eyes got bright, but he didn't look away. Tell me about him. Not the stuff from the reports, the real him, what he was like in those 16 hours. So Iris did. Told him about Sean Reese's terrible jokes that weren't funny, but made people laugh anyway, because laughter was better than screaming. Told him about the way his father kept asking about other casualties even though he was the one dying. Told him about the letter Sean had written and sealed and made Iris promise to find. The letter Dylan had received on his 18th birthday, 3 years after his mother died, words from a father he barely remembered telling him to be brave and kind, and remember that strength without compassion was just cruelty in uniform. They talked until the sun set and the training center emptied out, and the night shift security started their rounds. Talked about fathers and legacies and the weight of promises made to dead men. Talked about what it meant to serve when the system was broken, but the ideals still mattered. And when they finally left, Dylan walked a little taller, carrying his father's memory not as a burden, but as a foundation, something to build on instead of being crushed under. Iris watched him go and felt something she hadn't felt in 21 years. Not quite peace, but close. Close enough that she could imagine what peace might feel like if she ever let herself have it. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning, when most people were sleeping in or doing errands or living the kind of normal life that Iris had forgotten how to live, she sat in her apartment checking email on a laptop that had more security protocols than most government agencies. Routine stuff mostly, messages from veterans asking for help navigating the VA system, requests for guest lectures at military schools, updates from Ethan Nash about his new position as a cybersecurity consultant for the Department of Defense, working to build systems that people like Catherine Vale couldn't corrupt, and one email from an address she didn't recognize, encrypted, routed through servers in 3 different countries. The kind of security that said whoever sent this was serious about not being traced. She almost deleted it. Almost decided that she had earned the right to ignore mysterious messages and live quietly and let someone else handle whatever crisis was unfolding somewhere in the world. But ghosts didn't retire. Couldn't retire, because the work was never finished and the people who needed help kept needing it. She opened the email. The subject line was simple: Guardian Protocol. The message itself was brief, professional. The kind of communication that came from someone who understood operational security and didn't waste words. Iris Corwin, your work on Phoenix Protocol demonstrated capability and integrity we rarely encounter. We have a situation requiring both. 600 veterans dead from contaminated medications distributed through VA hospitals. Evidence suggests systematic corruption at the highest levels of Veterans Affairs. Pattern matches Phoenix Protocol methodology, but different players. We need someone who understands military logistics, has combat medicine experience, and cannot be bought or intimidated. Interested? Assignment details attached. Compensation negotiable, timeline urgent. Reply to this address if you want to know more. If not, this message will self-delete in 24 hours and we will find someone else. Signed, Guardian. Iris sat back, staring at the screen. 600 dead veterans, contaminated medications, a pattern that suggested Phoenix Protocol hadn't been a unique horror, but a template that others had copied. The same corruption, the same willingness to sacrifice soldiers for profit, just with a different method and different names. She could ignore it, could delete the email and go back to teaching and living quietly and letting the system handle its own problems. She had done her part, had brought down Catherine Vale and Marcus Halford and 21 other officers who thought they were untouchable, had given her life to a mission that nearly killed her a dozen times, had earned the right to rest. But rest was for people who could forget. And Iris Corwin remembered everything. She opened the attachment, read the details, saw the names of veterans who had died from medications that should have helped them, but instead poisoned them slowly over months or years. Saw the financial connections that traced back to pharmaceutical companies and corrupt administrators. Saw the same pattern of acceptable losses and plausible deniability and powerful people betting that no one would care enough to investigate. She thought about the students in her combat medicine class, about Dylan Reese becoming the kind of medic his father would have been proud of, about Grant Mitchell visiting his daughter's grave and finally having closure, about all the people who had helped her bring down Phoenix Protocol because they believed justice still mattered. She thought about this promise she had made to Sean Reese in the rubble of Nasiriyah, to look after his son, to make sure the sacrifices meant something, to keep fighting as long as there were fights worth fighting. 600 dead veterans, each one someone's father or son or daughter, each one someone who had served and survived and come home only to be killed by the system they had trusted to take care of them. Iris pulled up a reply window, typed 3 words. When do I start? She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The email disappeared from her inbox, deleted by whatever security protocol the sender had embedded in the message. No trace left behind except the knowledge that someone had asked for help, and she had answered. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Unknown number. Text message. Location: Walter Reed Medical Center, Washington, D.C. Cover identity: medical supply auditor. Contact arrives in 72 hours. Bring your cane, you'll need it. Welcome to Guardian Protocol. Iris stood up, walked to her closet, started pulling out the gear she had packed away after the Phoenix Protocol trials. Tactical clothing, medical supplies, the tools of her trade. The things that turned a 60-year-old woman with a limp into something dangerous and necessary and impossible to ignore. She looked at the cane leaning against her nightstand. Titanium shaft with a hidden compartment. Simple, functional, a weapon disguised as a disability aid. The perfect metaphor for everything she had become. Broken things can still cut. Wounded things can still fight. and ghosts never stopped hunting until every debt was paid and every promise was kept. Iris Corwin had one more mission. Maybe two, maybe a dozen. The work would continue until she physically couldn't do it anymore, or until the system was clean enough that people like her weren't needed. She suspected she would die before that happened. But dying while fighting for something that mattered was better than living safely while others suffered. She packed her bags, made her arrangements, sent messages to the people who needed to know she was leaving. Mitchell, Dylan, Ethan Nash. Not telling them where or why, just that she had work to do and she would be in touch when she could. And then she walked out of her apartment, locked the door behind her, and disappeared into the kind of quiet that came before the storm. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., corrupt administrators were sleeping peacefully, confident that their crimes would never be discovered, that their power would protect them, that no one cared enough about dead veterans to ask difficult questions. They were wrong. The ghost was coming, and this time she knew exactly where to look.